Let's travel into the future. What will we see?
Inventions. Predictions abound, all promising one thing, an easier life.
For instance, this space bed with automatic canopy has stereo and TV, and only $1,600.
This oscillating mechanism is a very friendly reducer. Each rubber-tired roller skates around on an independent axis, while the machine as a whole moves in a circle, streamlining the form by removing what is superfluous to symmetry.
Air conditioning was the coming industry, and this inventor in Arizona was right on the bandwagon with his air-conditioned suit. The invention was simplicity itself, I guess. He had bellows on each foot with tubes under his hat and in either sleeve. You just walk and voila, poof!
As usual, predictions were pretty well erroneous. You've got to remember that during the 1930s, people got more interested in physical sciences because they looked upon those sciences as our potential savior. Living in a depression, they were sure that a new machine, a new gadget, a new concept in construction would come along and provide all of these jobs and provide access to a world that they could not afford to even dream of living in under those circumstances. And I think they looked upon science as the Messiah and the machine as the great manna from heaven that would descend upon all of them.
This newest of gadgets is a fever-making reducer, and this St. George expert who gives the treatments is a physician who knows to what degree, up to 106, he can safely turn on the heat. This practical and profitable pancake producer possesses the beauty and fascination of a mechanical game. The flapjacks complete the circuit of the machine at the rate of 500 per batch of dough, and that's a good average for any batter. The important part of surf fishing is heaving the lead far enough from shore to hook the fish in their usual lair. The new catapult casting machine does the trick like an expert. Simply place the sinker in the spoon-shaped propeller, pull the trigger, and away she goes.
What an effortless world ahead. Technology harnessed, leisure time for all.
There would be equality of income. Everybody would be given a credit card at the beginning of the year, and they would spend up to the limit of their credit each year.
The high-tech home with living in the smart home with Robbie the robot around, which is the middle-class fantasy of having that robot there to do all those nasty household chores like the dishes and sweeping the rugs and all that sort of thing.
Domestic problems are completely solved.
Well, thank you very much.
That's perfectly all right. And if there's anything else you want to know about your robot, don't hesitate to give us a ring. Good day.
The concept of robots became popular because it gave everybody a wish fulfillment. And the wish fulfillment was that of control. Employers loved the idea of robot employees in the future. Housewives loved the idea of having robot service in the home, you know, do all of the chores.
If you can get a non-human machine to do everything for you, it replaces the need for servants. It appeals to us particularly because we're looking for ways of solving our problems and not having a large class of poor, indentured, dependent people who help us. They'd rather let us have robots.
Yes, ma'am. Rolo, get.
This would be the life, a virtual utopia, free of drudgery, complications, and problems. Buy into the dream, and along come the perks, real and imagined, like the electric belt, courtesy of Sears. Or perhaps something more comfortable. There were clothes that only science fiction could conjure up, and actual wardrobes that were out of this world. And where would all these fine clothes get a thorough cleaning? In your neighborhood walk-through dry cleaner, of course.
Just walk right into the dry cleaners, take your turn in line, and then step into the tank.
Domestic pleasures for every room of the house. Every room.
And so to bed, in the bed of a coming tomorrow, night. A bed for dreams, but by the pressure of a button, it becomes a bed for relaxing reading in a proper reading posture under an ideal light. Adjusted now for sleep, you'd think the bed also was through for the night, wouldn't you? Out to the sleeping porch, to return in the same manner in the morning to the warm boudoir after a night of restful slumber in the open air.
Even coming into the world of tomorrow promised new and exciting adventures.
One nurse at a central control panel will be able to manage a whole brigade of babies, and the tykes will spend happily antiseptic infancies untouched by human hands. They'll even be tucked into their cribs by remote control. Bringing up baby by push button, a grandiose conception indeed. But there's one flaw apparent in this brave new world. After the bottle, how are they going to burp him?
Futurists had an eye on the woman of the house. Alluring, demure, sensual. A Stepford wife pictured in a Levittown life.
And all the women are notable because they are obviously secondary to the men in wherever you visit.
At the touch of a dainty toe, a trapdoor scale drops into place. Usually out of sight, but seldom out of mind, the disappearing scale is bound to be popular with women who weigh themselves in secret. For it keeps the body budget balanced at a healthy and presentable figure.
The futurists, even as future thinkers, are kind of present time bound in some cases. And I think they bought into the government propaganda of the time that the women had to go home and raise families, restore the nation, and get out of the workplace.
Well, I guess we had to recover from the Second World War. There was a tremendous, desire to get back to normal, which is very understandable. I think they were promising us that we would get married, have babies, and live happily ever after. We bought into the idea that you could be fulfilled through creature comfort alone.
We can have an even higher standard of living in the future by increasing our productivity, which will mean more and better products for all.
Persons of color were disenfranchised and not encouraged to participate in the labor force. The same was true with women. The role of woman was to be homemaker, bearer of children, and supporter of the breadwinner.
Monsanto's House of the Future is open to the public at Disneyland. The four-wing plastic shell makes a snug and solid 5-room dwelling designed for a family of 4. And coincidentally, it's a fairly typical family of 4 that gets first look. A family food center to store atomically irradiated food. A work surface that includes a combination supersonic dishwasher and storage unit. The kids' bathroom has a wash basin that adjusts to fit the height of the growing child. Throughout, the emphasis is on new uses of plastics in every area of family living, pioneering the use of features that may be standard in 10 years or so. A look at the future. Looks good, eh?
As of September 1999, 201 million people are online in the world. North Americans make up 112.4 million of that number. We now return to Modern Marvels.
This was the dream of those who came before us. The mighty city, testament to the scientists, the engineers, the builders. Move to the city, they said. The city of tomorrow will solve all our problems.
It's where the commerce was going, and it was the major urban area. And it was basically a simple extrapolation. If you have a 10-story building, why not a 20? If we can build a 20, why not build a 50? Now, do we want a building that's 200 stories high and creates a dark city? But those kinds of things are ignored in the enthusiasm to forge ahead.
The pace of technology accelerated. The city of the future, as seen in the 1920s, was fueled by oil, but it was choking on its own excesses. As the visionaries focused more on the future, the great metropolis was beginning to look more like a great mess.
Everyone on the surface would have a very exciting, stimulating life, and they would be the upper class. They would be the owners of capital. Underground, you would have the workers in their blue uniforms, and they would be miserable. They would be wretched. They would be underpaid, and they would be at the mercy of the machine. They would have to adjust their lives to the rhythm of the machine. Nobody had thought at that time that possibly automation would mean there wouldn't be any need for manual workers anymore. And at that time, it was thought that every machine would naturally have to have a tender.
The time would come when we'd have a greater gap between the hierarchy in charge and the menial and manual workers.
Underground cities. If the air was too polluted and the cities were overcrowded, then perhaps subterranean living was the shape of things to come.
They built houses like that in the old days.
Why?
They'd no light inside their cities as we have, so they had to stick them up into the daylight. What there was of it. They'd no properly mixed and conditioned air. Everybody lived half out of doors. They had windows with brittle glass. The age of windows lasted 4 centuries.
I think that underground cities were popular in the period between the two world wars because so many people during the First World War had become aware of the terrible power of bombs, and it affected them psychologically to the point where they felt that there was security and safety below the surface of the earth, but they wanted something a little bit better than a shell hole to hide in. And as a result, the underground city became a staple of science fiction for about 20 years.
It seems to me that obviously the juxtaposition of being underground as opposed to above ground is that you have the opportunity to control what's going to happen. You are master of the universe, and it's not just in terms of a physical sense, your living environment, but I think in terms of a behavioral sense too, because to get people to want to live underground, you have to be selective of who does and doesn't live underground. So you get to control the nature of the evolution of the society, whether that's from a race point of view or from a gender point of view. It's the notion of control, I think.
Picturing the future was usually left up to scientists, magazine artists, science fiction writers, and with the invention of film, the motion picture director. But the future was, in reality, something you couldn't touch you couldn't see, you couldn't have, until the 1939 New York World's Fair.
We had just been 10, 15, 20 years out of World War I, and there's a lot of despair, and following that period, it's like, well, how can we look, what can we see positive? We need something to look forward to. And at that time, there was a lot of tension that this was going to happen all over again. So it's, in some sense, it's an escape from what was happening at the time, and the other was people need hope.
It was a feast of the marvels to be produced by science and technology. A very, very, very exhilarating experience. I mean, I remember, as a boy, I went to it, and there was all kinds of wonderful things to see.
I hereby dedicate the World's Fair of 1939.
So many of the things forecast never came to, no one ever anticipated the problems of this incredible urban sprawl. There are no non-white faces to be seen any place.
The rights of way have been so rooted as to displace outmoded business sections and undesirable slum areas whenever possible.
In essence, African Americans and following them Latinos were second-class American citizens. So when you think America and project America, you certainly wouldn't project not the best, i.e. the second-class group. You would only focus on the real Americans. And I think that was the ethos, if you will, the focus of what we were about as a nation.
And so we see some suggestion of the things to come. A world with a future in which all of us are tremendously interested. Because that is where we are going to spend the rest of our lives.
The number of Americans that will live to see their 100th birthday has nearly doubled from just 10 years ago. 4 out of 5 centenarians are women. We now return to Modern Marvels.
Before inventors, there had to be believers. Back in the 1800s, belief in things fantastic was furthered by the vision and wisdom of Jules Verne.
I see Verne as a writer of not science fiction, but technology fiction. His visions are more of great whiz-bang adventures involving super technologies. He was concerned with the advancement of technology, especially in the area of transport.
The importance of Jules Verne in our culture was that he dared to speak the unspeakable, the idea that nothing is impossible. He rode around the world in 80 days. He was exploring every possible area that mankind had not yet been able to fully encompass or conquer. And this gave the readers of that day a particular jolt, because suddenly the dimensions of their world expanded.
Verne wrote of majestic airships that could circle the globe in 80 days, and flying machines that would defy gravity itself.
What's kind of interesting, especially with Verne, is a writer like him, is that he really studied the science, and a lot of his predictions were pretty darn accurate.
Verne's imagination challenged others. Once flying was mastered by daring aviators, it was reasoned, then virtual highways in the sky would be open to everybody.
All of us kids at that time were expecting that after the war everyone would have their own private plane and fly here and there. This began with back really in the late 19th century with the perfection of dirigible lighter-than-aircraft. And course, everyone was hoping that not only would you have the big ones, but also little ones for families, and that this would be a safe, easy form of transport.
On many of the buildings are landing decks for helicopters and autogyros.
To the dreamers of the time, the possibilities were limitless. Reality was simply a matter of the scientists and the engineers catching up.
Now, a preview of the flying wing transport of tomorrow. The midsection provides ample room for 80 passengers. Spaciousness keynotes the luxurious main lounge, extending 53 feet inside the wing. And future air travelers will really see something. Through the plexiglass windows of the front wing edge, passengers have an unimpaired view of the Earth unrolling thousands of feet below. Coast-to-coast flights in 4 hours may not be too far away. The dorsal tip of the plane provides an excellent vantage point to see the world go by. Snug as bugs in their magic carpet, air travelers can look down on mere Earthlings as the double quartet of mighty turbojets whistle them through space.
The flying wing is a kind of a concept that would captivate a public, but I'm sure with our skill that it could have been perfected and manufactured, because nothing in the concept was beyond the range of our present-day technology. It's just a matter of adapting that technology to the proper kind of mass production.
And the bar will raise the spirits of those who don't feel high enough in the stratosphere. The flying wing has the stability of a fine club, and refreshments can safely be wheeled in. This new device is an electromagnetic table holder. The public quickly accepts all the miracles that science provides.
Today, the flying wing is scrap metal, a failed dream. But for a time, it was an actual marriage of fiction with fact, dream with reality. Not all futurists' ideas were in the ozone layer. Some were well-grounded.
There are a lot of wild ideas about cars that can drive and fly and swim. I mean, technically it's possible, but obviously financially, economically, it's not possible to do that.
There has always been a search for an amphibious automobile, and this inventor in Glendale, California, had one answer in his mobile boat. It proved efficient.
Of course, that time, not many people could afford to have cars. And most people envision the future as everybody having 1 or 2 or 3 cars, which they do, instead of bicycles or horses and buggies. So that came true because cheap petroleum, mass production, and transportation.
The automobile, a mode of transportation that quickly put all predictions of the future into high gear.
The road of tomorrow. In brightly colored Ford, Mercury, and Lincoln Zephyr cars, visitors are driven around this road of the future for more than half a mile.
Beautiful super highways. Oh, Lord, beautiful super highways, beautiful cars, and please note at a price that everyone could afford.
The message was coming from Detroit via the 1939 World's Fair. The route to tomorrow was straight ahead along the Futurama.
And now we see an enlarged section of 1960s express motorway. Along the ledge of this beautiful precipice, traffic moves at unreduced rates of speed. Safe distance between cars is maintained by automatic radio control. Curved sides assist the driver in keeping his car within the proper lane under all circumstances. The keynote of this motorway, safety. Safety with increased speed.
The 1939 World's Fair focused on the future for the same reason that a man, woman, and child on the street was focusing on the future, because the present was still miserable.
Here is an important intersection in the great metropolis of 1960.
There was no indication that there was going to be the problems of enormous traffic jams.
Elevated sidewalks give a new measure of safety and convenience to pedestrians. They actually double the available width for traffic in the street.
And the last thing we thought, that building super-duper highways and wonderful cars and so forth at a modest price was going to lead to the massive growth of suburbia. This was totally unanticipated.
True, each of us may have different ideas as to what that future will be. But every forward outlook reminds us that all the highways of all research and all communication, all the activities of science, lead us onward to better methods of doing things.
In 1967, futurists predicted that before the year 2000, there would be permanent underwater settlements and artificial moons placed in the sky to illuminate wide areas. We now return to Modern Marvels.
War in the future, we were alerted, would destroy everything. Soldiers, families, nations, and ultimately hope itself. The image was clear. Impenetrable tanks rolling across borders, followed by science's secret weapon, the death ray.
Of course, you had the death ray. By God, that's coming. The laser is coming, but the death ray was anticipated even before World War I, and in the period between the wars, there was a great deal of talk about it.
The weapons of mass destruction were seen in the mind's eye and the printed word of H.G. Wells. Uncanny predictions. The future as history.
In 1902, he wrote a book in which he said that airplanes would become quite a likely possibility within a few years, and that eventually they would be a major form of, mostly of communication. He expected them to, at first, just to be providing mail service and perhaps limited passenger service. But in The War in the Air in 1908, he really understood that already, of course, aircraft were now in the air by this time. He understood that it would be possible to load up aircraft with bombs. But Wells's war was a gigantic war of mass destruction in which the principal protagonists were Germany and the United States. And there's a great air war over New York State in the great air battle.
The world survived the real war that Wells had foretold. Would it be so lucky the second time? The historian thought otherwise in his most prophetic work, The Shape of Things to Come.
In that novel in 1933, he recounts the story of the Great War that broke out in 1940, starting on the German-Polish frontier, very close to what really happened in 1939.
The war would last 40 years, according to Wells, and the outcome, life as we would not know it.
In the south of Iraq, a group of enlightened engineers and technocrats and airmen form the air dictatorship, and they have control of the air. They have a lot of planes at their disposal, and they impose a worldwide air dictatorship that brings, again, reason and light and order and science to humanity. They subdue the bullies and the strong men and impose their will, and out of it comes a great scientific utopia.
For now, we have to put the world in order. It will be a long and complicated struggle, but we have the unity of a common order and a common knowledge. Wings over the world, and the new world begins.
But he anticipated again and again in this novel and many others that a great war would come, that it would be fought in the air with super weapons, high explosives, even atomic bombs. In 1914, he predicted that.
power of the atom, unleashed in war, would be our savior in peace. This was the promise of the nuclear age. Nuclear power would provide an infinite source of energy. Life would be wonderful. Those idyllic dreams were back in focus, all courtesy of our friend, the atom.
This looks like a normal medical scene, but it isn't. It's atomic energy at work, as a blessing. And this looks like what it is, devastation due to an atomic blast. Must atomic energy lead only to destruction like this? Or can it be used as it is here, a blessing to mankind?
The general outlook was that technology was good, and there was faith in the experts. And the prototypical example of that was nuclear power, which was promised in the 1950s when it was developed, that it was going to be abundant and cheap and safe.
Here's another experiment with farm animals, with sheep. The sheep are eating cubes of food containing radioactive elements of various kinds. It doesn't harm the sheep, but it gives us a means of finding out how to build better lamb chops and mutton for the future.
Healing or hurting? Medical uses aside, the Army had found its dream weapon. One government scenario suggested that all our field commanders had to do was provide troops with a little guidance.
I have called this conference to announce allocations of atomic missiles to each Army for the next phase of our operation.
The Army was doing its best in the 1950s and early 60s to try to develop a doctrine to use nuclear weapons.
For the first time, our theater allocation is large enough. Nevertheless, our supply of atomic missiles is still relatively small, so it's imperative that we make the most of them. With your allocation goes a great responsibility. It is up to you, Army and Corps commanders, to select targets which will contribute materially to the accomplishment of this mission. Once you have done that, and have made absolutely certain that conventional weapons can't do the job, then use your atomic missiles, and use enough to ensure success.
They had not thought through the fact as to how, once you employ the weapons, you continue to fight the war.
But with the number of atomic missiles allotted us, there is little possibility of destroying the enemy's will to fight solely by the casualty-producing effect.
It finally became evident that you can't use nuclear weapons. In other words, you can use them, but you can't use them effectively. They just, either you use them lightly and you create all kinds of destruction, then how do you move over the area that you've destroyed? And if you use them, what is the enemy going to do? And what is going to be the result of the escalation that takes place? And the end result is apocalypse.
One belief about the atom was paramount. This destructive power in the wrong hands could mean certain doom. And the wrong hands, clearly, were the Russians. The weapon that could incinerate the Earth in seconds fueled the Cold War for decades.
Feels like the end of the world. It's going to be a commie world. I don't want it anyway.
Russia was going to make a move here, we were going to make a move there, and basically it was the world was our chessboard to play with, and it was a big strategy game. And really the Cold War was the big driver of looking at the future.
You just tell your government that someday its own people are going to get wise to it. Someday there's going to be enough holes in that Iron Curtain that all of your people will be able to escape to freedom. You'll never be able to build a wall strong enough to hold them.
Well, that is one thing that I did not know about as a prediction, wish I had. That would be the collapse and obliteration of the Soviet Union. I don't think anybody felt that this was going to happen within the foreseeable future.
In October 1999, a baby boy born in Sarajevo was symbolically designated the world's 6 billionth person.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Professor Lowell, one of our eminent astronomers, believed that intelligent life exists on Mars. Knowing that there are water vapor and oxygen on the planet, and that these sustain life, he said that the canals were laid out by intelligent beings to irrigate the surface.
Oh, those terrible Martians. The notion was so widely held, no wonder Orson Welles' broadcast had such impact.
I'm extremely surprised to learn that a story which has become familiar to children through the medium of comic strips and many succeeding novels and such an immediate and profound effect upon radio listeners.
But if Mars inspired literature, it also inspired inventions.
It's curious, but Robert Goddard, who developed the first really workable rocket that could propel ships into outer space, was inspired to develop those rockets, as he did during World War I and thereafter, by reading H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds when he was a little boy in Massachusetts.
Closer to home, if not closer to the realm of possibility, was what mysteries a trip to the moon would reveal.
Verne wrote one of his most famous books regarding a trip to the moon merely because at that time it seemed about as far out as the human race might even dream of ever attaining. And it became symbolic, of course, of space travel through generations that followed it. My own belief is that Jules Verne, who was noted for being somewhat tight-fisted and stingy with money, didn't dare think of a trip further than the moon because he thought that the ticket fare would be too high.
Verne wasn't entirely correct. There would be no rocket cannon, there would be no moon men, and there would be no air on the moon. But he did ignite a world of thought which took off like a rocket. Space has always been a haven for our dreams. It's impossible not to look at the stars and wonder.
And this symbolizes the beginnings of the human conquest of space, which takes us away again from our petty concerns on the planet Earth.
There's a great sense of adventure being in a starship, going off, seeking out new life. And I think it also represents a family of better humans, humans that have evolved, humans that are free of a lot of the things that are troubling in the 20th century, working and living together in some degree of harmony.
We're such little creatures. Poor humanity is so fragile, so weak. Little animals. Little animals. And if we're no more than animals, we must snatch each little scrap of happiness and live and suffer and part, mattering no more than all the other animals do or have done. It is this or that. All the universe or nothing. Which shall it be? Which shall it be?
We've seen the future that never happened, But what of the futures still to come? What's in store for us as we embark upon the 21st century?
I think that robots are very much a part of the war of the future.
You would have a mega corporate economy that would be probably not a great thing for a lot of people, because there would be a widening of the gap between the rich and the poor.
I think a key transformation that is imminent is the man-woman relationship.
We will have a robust, healthy job market. We will still be one of the strongest economies in the world.
I believe that we most likely will never be able to travel to see other star systems other than the ones that are very, very close to our planet.
Detonation of a single nuclear weapon by accident or intention.
The History Channel is proud to present on home video the episode you've just seen of Modern Marvels. Explore the man-made wonders of the world. Call 1-800-708-1776, and for only $19.95 plus shipping and handling, receive Modern Marvels.